Zoltan gave us a very good, wide, broad historical framework for what's happened, and really helpful to see the current Greek crisis in that perspective. I'd like to draw one more concentric circle around that, something that Hazel has alluded to very well in her reference to casino capitalism and all, is that after the end of the Cold War, we seem to have gone with increasing speed back to an economic doctrine that had really been discredited and ran us into trouble in 1929 and during the 1930s. And I think one of the obvious or most apparent reasons for that is because after the end of the Cold War, we really had an opening up of global markets and global communication and global relationships in an unprecedented way that we hadn't had probably since the 20s, and with much greater capabilities for communication and movement of money and movement of people and so forth. And I guess it raises the fundamental question: if there's truth in that premise that the society is moving to a new level, and the philosophy or the theory that has been driving activity has been very much the result of the circumstances we're in. It's not like it was theory driving practice as much as the situation of an unstructured, unregulated, ungoverned Wild West of international financial market has really been driving theory to rationalize and explain it. And of course, it's not limited just to finance. It has to do with the whole way that corporations function in a world in which no government, including the US government, really can any longer exert the full control over them. So I think theoretically, we need to be able to think about how our theory leads into or relates to the issue of economic and political regulation at a level that doesn't exist today. I think a number of the comments, and now they're all blurring in my mind as to who made which, so I acknowledge all of you, have referred to the fact, starting with Zoltan and Dimitrios and on, that the austerity, there's just no evidence, quite the contrary, that austerity and the austerity program is going to work. And I think the fact that our discussion has been so much focused on debt levels and debt repayment and austerity cuts has really already taken us one remove from the fundamentals of economy, and that is the basis of any successful economy has to be wealth generation and increased productivity. And as more than one speaker alluded to, Greece seems to now be held hostage to the dictates to manage their society in terms of a few narrow-gauged indicators that have no hope of solving the problem. So the question theoretically is, how do we get back to really raising the productivity of a society under these circumstances? Okay, we may need a haircut or short-term financial relief or any other set of policies, but what could we be doing in Greece and other places to shift the focus from this macroeconomic monetary management and debt management to really raising productivity of the society? And how is our economic theory going to center in on that? The third point, Hazel has spoken to so well that I will just check it on the list, and that is the real purpose of financial markets. And how do we get them back in tune to really serving the real economy and really promoting human welfare and not just going off on their own? And we remember that this whole problem in Greece, as Zoltan's chart showed, really starts, though the problem is much older. It was doing fine in until the financial collapse of 2008 set suddenly introduced very extreme conditions, which it couldn't meet. How are we going to prevent that in future? And what is the theory about the right role of financial markets in supporting the real economy? Another point which I'm not sure has been directly raised, but I think it's worth at least flagging for further discussion later on. We see countries have rushed to join the Eurozone, the EU, the Eurozone. I have little information about what was the expectations of Greece at the time when it joined the European community, but we see that happening today. Croatia's in there now. Other countries are lining up to join the 28 or so that are already there. And I guess it raises the fundamental question as to with what attitude do countries come together in what is certainly a pioneering experiment in trying to build economic and political cooperation at a higher level. Now we find during the early 2000 period, everything was going so expansively that the countries, the Euro, seemed to be a great success. The countries were all in harmony, but now that crisis has come, everybody's pulling back, and a lot of the consensus has broken up. I think we really have to look theoretically at what is the premises on which an economic union and a political union can be successful. And that goes to the point which has been raised, I think it was Aldo who raised it, but regarding, or Demetrius, about the characteristics or criteria for an effective monetary union. Clearly, we see in the Eurozone that the political commitment doesn't match the economic setup that we have, and Greece has given up some of its options monetarily. It's given up its options for using its own exchange rate and so forth, or creating money for itself, and yet we don't have the right political institutions. It's something that has been flagged by many economists and others in recent times. I think we need to look at that theoretically and see what exactly, we go back to the old concept of political economy, what exactly is the relationship between economic regulation and governance, and what are the implications of that for successful economic development, both at the regional level, the national level in Greece, the regional level in Europe, and globally as we go forward. And I just try to sum this up in three statements: that it is social aspirations and capacity that generates the economic potential. And our discussion and policy is not focusing at that level at all now. Therefore, we don't see a way to release and generate that potential. The second, that it's political institutions and political will that generate the power for collective action. And here what we have is a conflict of political will rather than a collective commitment on political will to really address the problem, whether it's the Greek problem or the European problem or certainly the global problem. And finally, then we come to economy, which is really the instrumentation to make those social aspirations effective, and through the power generated by political institutions. So when we think about a transdisciplinary approach to economic theory, I think we're going to need to look at how the social, the political, and the economic dimensions come together.